The morning mist clung to the dense jungle canopy like a ghostly veil, creating an ethereal atmosphere that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Captain Saracen crouched behind a massive mahogany tree, her breathing controlled and silent as she studied the enemy compound through her scope. The intelligence briefing had been clear: a heavily fortified drug cartel stronghold housing over 60 armed militants, with innocent civilians being held as leverage. Her mission was reconnaissance only, but Sarah knew that sometimes the best-laid plans crumble when faced with reality. Sarah had earned her reputation as one of the military's most lethal operatives through years of grueling training and countless successful missions. Her background in psychological warfare, combined with her expertise in stealth operations, made her the perfect candidate for solo infiltration missions. Born to a military family, she had grown up understanding that freedom came at a price, and she was willing to pay it. Her father, a decorated Navy SEAL, had instilled in her the values of honor, courage, and unwavering determination. Her mother, a former intelligence analyst, had taught her the importance of strategic thinking and patience. The specialized camouflage suit she wore was a marvel of modern military technology. Developed by the Defense Department's most innovative engineers, it utilized advanced fiber optics and microcameras to create a chameleon-like effect, allowing the wearer to blend seamlessly with their surroundings. The suit could adapt to different environments within seconds, analyzing the immediate area through hundreds of tiny sensors and adjusting its appearance accordingly. It had cost the government millions of dollars to develop, and only a select few operatives were authorized to use it. As Sarah adjusted her position, she felt a slight tingling sensation along her spine where the suit's main control unit was located. She had experienced this before during training exercises, usually indicating that the suit was working harder to maintain camouflage in challenging lighting conditions. The jungle's dappled sunlight, filtering through layers of leaves, created a complex pattern of light and shadow that would challenge even the most advanced technology. Through her earpiece, she heard the calm voice of her handler, Colonel Martinez, providing updates from the command center located 50 miles away. The satellite imagery showed increased activity around the compound, with vehicles arriving throughout the morning. Intelligence suggested that a major arms deal was scheduled to take place within the next few hours, making this the perfect opportunity to gather crucial information about the cartel's operations and supply chains. Sarah's mission parameters were specific: observe, record, and report. Under no circumstances was she to engage unless her own life was in immediate danger. The military brass wanted to avoid any international incidents, especially in this politically sensitive region where government corruption ran deep and allegiances shifted like sand in the wind. The last thing they needed was for an American operative to be captured or killed on foreign soil during an unauthorized engagement. The compound itself was an impressive display of criminal engineering. High concrete walls surrounded the main buildings, topped with razor wire and equipped with motion sensors. Guard towers positioned at strategic intervals provided overlapping fields of fire, while armed patrols moved in predictable patterns around the perimeter. The main building, a sprawling structure that had once been a colonial mansion, served as both headquarters and fortress for the cartel leadership. Sarah counted at least 20 guards visible from her position, each armed with military-grade weapons that had likely been stolen from government armories or purchased through corrupt officials. Their discipline varied significantly. Some moved with the precision of former military personnel, while others displayed the casual arrogance of street thugs who had never faced a real threat to their dominance. As she continued her surveillance, Sarah noticed something troubling. Among the guards, she spotted several individuals who appeared to be civilians, men, women, and even children who moved with the hesitant, fearful body language of prisoners rather than the confident swagger of criminals. Her jaw tightened as she realized that the intelligence reports had been accurate. The cartel was indeed using innocent people as human shields, a tactic that complicated any potential military response. The tingling sensation in her suit intensified, and Sarah glanced down to check the status display on her wrist-mounted control panel. The readout showed all systems functioning normally, with power levels at 95% and camouflage efficiency rated at maximum effectiveness. Yet something felt wrong. The tingling had evolved into a more pronounced buzzing sensation, and she noticed that the suit's color patterns seemed to be shifting more rapidly than usual. Through her scope, she watched as a convoy of black SUVs approached the compound's main gate. The vehicles were sleek and expensive, clearly belonging to high-ranking cartel members or their associates. As the convoy passed through the security checkpoint, Sarah adjusted her position to get a better view of the passengers. This could be the intelligence windfall that Command had been hoping for, faces and identities that could be used to dismantle the entire network. The first vehicle disgorged 4 men in expensive suits, their movements confident and commanding. Sarah recognized one of them from intelligence photos, Miguel Santos, the cartel's second-in-command and the man responsible for coordinating their international operations. His presence here confirmed that this was indeed a significant meeting, likely involving millions of dollars in illegal transactions. As Sarah focused her camera on Santos and his associates, the buzzing in her suit became almost unbearable. She tried to ignore the distraction, knowing that this footage could be crucial for future operations. But, then, without warning, the suit's display panel flickered and went dark. The sophisticated camouflage that had been her invisible shield began to malfunction catastrophically. Instead of the smooth, seamless blending that the suit was designed to provide, Sarah's outline began to shimmer and distort like a mirage in the desert heat. The advanced fiber optics that created the illusion of invisibility started flashing random colors, bright blues, stark whites, and vivid greens that stood out like a beacon against the natural jungle backdrop. In a matter of seconds, she had transformed from an invisible observer into a highly visible target. The first shout came from a guard in the nearest tower, his voice carrying clearly across the compound as he pointed in Sarah's direction. Within moments, the entire security force was mobilizing, with armed men running toward her position while others took cover and aimed their weapons at the treeline. The element of surprise, her greatest asset, had been stripped away in the most catastrophic manner possible. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. Years of preparation for worst-case scenarios had programmed her responses at an almost instinctual level. She rolled away from the tree just as the first bullets began splintering the bark where she had been crouched. Her rifle was already in her hands, the familiar weight providing comfort even as chaos erupted around her. The malfunctioning suit continued its light show, making stealth impossible but providing an unexpected psychological advantage. The guards, trained to deal with conventional threats, were clearly unsettled by her bizarre appearance. Some hesitated, uncertain whether they were facing a human enemy or some kind of supernatural phenomenon. That hesitation, brief as it was, gave Sarah the opening she needed. Her first shot took down the guard in the tower who had spotted her. The man dropped silently, his rifle clattering to the wooden platform below. Sarah was already moving, using the dense jungle vegetation to break up her profile even as her suit continued its chaotic display. The key now was not invisibility, which was impossible, but unpredictability. The compound erupted into chaos as guards ran in all directions, some taking defensive positions while others searched for the source of the threat. Sarah could hear Santos and his associates shouting orders in Spanish, their earlier confidence replaced by panic and confusion. This was not how their important business meeting was supposed to proceed. Through her earpiece, Colonel Martinez's voice crackled with urgency. Echo 7, report your status. We're seeing massive heat signatures at your location. Sarah couldn't respond without giving away her position, but she knew that her handler would understand her silence. The mission had gone from reconnaissance to survival, and survival meant eliminating the threats before they eliminated her. As Sarah moved through the jungle, the malfunctioning suit created an almost hypnotic effect. The random patterns of light and color, combined with her fluid movements, made it difficult for the guards to maintain target acquisition. Several times, she watched as men aimed directly at her only to lose her in the visual chaos created by the failing technology. The irony was not lost on her. The very malfunction that had blown her cover was now providing a different kind of protection. Instead of making her invisible, it was making her impossible to track accurately. The guards were shooting at shadows and reflections, their bullets going wide as they struggled to separate reality from the optical illusion created by the damaged suit. But Sarah knew that this advantage was temporary. The guards would adapt quickly, and, more importantly, her position was becoming increasingly compromised as more men joined the search. The compound had been designed to keep people in, but it was equally effective at keeping threats trapped within its walls. She needed to reduce the odds quickly, before numerical superiority overwhelmed her tactical advantages. The first group of guards approached her position in a loose formation, their weapons ready but their movements hesitant. They had heard the shot that took down their colleague, but the jungle's acoustic properties made it difficult to pinpoint the exact source. Sarah waited until they were within optimal range before engaging, her training taking over as she methodically eliminated each target with precision shots that dropped them silently to the forest floor. The specialized ammunition she carried was designed for stealth operations, subsonic rounds that minimized noise while maintaining stopping power. Each shot was carefully placed to ensure immediate incapacitation without the screams or prolonged struggles that might alert other guards. In less than 30 seconds, 5 men lay dead among the ferns and fallen logs, their weapons now available for Sarah's use if needed. As she moved deeper into the compound's defensive perimeter, Sarah began to understand the true scope of her situation. The intelligence estimate of 60 armed militants had been conservative. She could count at least 70 guards mobilizing to hunt her down. They were coordinating their search through radio communications, gradually tightening the net around her position. Time was running out, and her ammunition, while sufficient for a reconnaissance mission, would not last long against such overwhelming numbers. The malfunctioning suit had stabilized somewhat, now cycling through a more predictable pattern of colors and intensities. While still far from its intended function, the display had become less chaotic and more manageable. Sarah realized that she could time her movements to coincide with darker phases of the cycle, providing brief windows of reduced visibility. In the distance, she could see civilians being herded into the main building, their captors using them as insurance against any potential military response. The sight strengthened Sarah's resolve. These people were counting on her, whether they knew it or not. Failure here would mean not only her own death but the continued suffering of innocent victims caught in the cartel's web of violence and exploitation. The jungle around the compound was filled with the sounds of her pursuers, breaking branches, muttered communications, and the metallic clicks of weapons being readied for action. Sarah moved like a predator through this chaos, using every shadow and natural barrier to remain one step ahead of the search teams. Her years of training in asymmetric warfare were paying off as she transformed from hunted prey into an apex predator. As the first document of her extraordinary ordeal drew to a close, Sarah Chen found herself facing impossible odds with nothing but her skills, her determination, and a malfunctioning piece of technology that had become both her greatest liability and her most unexpected asset. The mission had changed from information gathering to something far more deadly, and she was ready to write the next chapter in blood if necessary. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the jungle canopy, creating a greenhouse effect that made the air thick and oppressive. Sarah moved through the undergrowth like a phantom, her malfunctioning suit now working in her favor as the chaotic light patterns confused her pursuers. She had eliminated 12 guards in the past hour, each kill executed with surgical precision that left no trace of her passage except for bodies that would not be discovered until it was far too late. The compound's security had evolved from organized defense to panicked chaos. Guards who had started the day confident in their numerical superiority now jumped at shadows and fired at imaginary threats. Sarah could hear their nervous chatter through intercepted radio communications, their Spanish rapid and filled with superstitious fear. Some were convinced they faced a demon or ghost, while others argued for more practical explanations. The uncertainty worked in her favor, sowing doubt and paranoia among her enemies. Miguel Santos had taken personal command of the search operation, his earlier business meeting forgotten in the face of this unprecedented threat. Through her scope, Sarah watched him barking orders from the safety of the main building's fortified entrance. His expensive suit was stained with sweat, and his usual composed demeanor had cracked under pressure. She could have taken the shot, eliminated him and disrupted the cartel's command structure, but doing so would reveal her position to the dozen guards surrounding him. Instead, Sarah focused on isolating and eliminating the search teams methodically. She had identified their patrol patterns and communication schedules, using this intelligence to predict where guards would be at specific times. The jungle provided perfect hunting grounds, dense vegetation, multiple levels of concealment, and natural sound barriers that muffled gunshots and prevented easy coordination between enemy units. Her next targets were a four-man team moving through a particularly thick section of undergrowth about 200 meters from her position. The men moved with military precision, suggesting they were former soldiers who had found more lucrative employment with the cartel. Their discipline made them dangerous, but it also made them predictable. Sarah shadowed them for 10 minutes, learning their formation and communication patterns before making her move. The first guard died without knowing what hit him, Sarah's knife sliding between his ribs to pierce his heart while her hand covered his mouth. She lowered his body silently to the ground, then moved to intercept the second man who had been bringing up the rear. Her approach was soundless, years of training allowing her to navigate through dense vegetation without disturbing so much as a leaf. The second guard turned just as Sarah's blade found his throat, his eyes widening in shock before the light faded from them forever. The remaining 2 guards realized something was wrong when their teammates failed to respond to radio checks. They moved back to back, weapons raised, eyes scanning the jungle for any sign of threat. Sarah watched them from a position 15 feet away, close enough to hear their whispered prayers and see the sweat beading on their foreheads. The malfunctioning suit's color patterns had shifted to deeper greens and browns, providing better camouflage in the shadowed undergrowth. When she moved, it was with explosive speed. The first guard caught a glimpse of shifting light and color before Sarah's rifle but connected with his temple, dropping him unconscious to the forest floor. The fourth man spun toward the sound, his finger on the trigger, but Sarah was already inside his weapon's effective range. A quick strike to his wrist numbed his gun hand, followed by a precise blow to the nerve cluster at the base of his neck. He collapsed instantly, joining his teammate in unconsciousness rather than death. Sarah zip-tied the unconscious guards and stripped them of their communications equipment and spare ammunition. Keeping them alive served multiple purposes. It reduced the number of active threats while providing potential intelligence sources. More importantly, discovering unconscious rather than dead teammates would further unnerve the remaining guards, making them wonder what kind of enemy could choose between life and death so arbitrarily. The radio chatter became increasingly frantic as more teams failed to report in. Sarah could hear Santos demanding updates, his voice tight with frustration and growing fear. The cartel leader was beginning to understand that he faced something beyond his experience, not a military assault team or rival cartel, but a single operator who seemed to appear and disappear at will, leaving death and confusion in her wake. As the search intensified, Sarah decided to shift tactics. Instead of continuing to pick off isolated teams, she would create a distraction that would draw the guards away from the civilian hostages. The compound's fuel depot, located near the vehicle pool, presented an attractive target. Destroying it would not only eliminate transportation options but create enough chaos to mask her movements while she repositioned for the next phase of her impromptu mission. Moving toward the depot required crossing 200 meters of relatively open ground, a dangerous proposition even with her malfunctioning camouflage. Sarah studied the terrain carefully, identifying patches of shadow and natural cover that could mask her approach. The suit's color patterns had settled into a more stable rhythm, cycling between earth tones that provided reasonable camouflage when she timed her movements correctly. The fuel depot was guarded by 6 men positioned around its perimeter, their attention focused outward toward the jungle where their comrades had been disappearing. Sarah approached from an angle that placed the setting sun behind her, using the glare to mask her approach. The guard's eyes, adapted to the shadowed compound, struggled to penetrate the bright background light where her silhouette might otherwise be visible. Her first shot took down the guard nearest to the main fuel tank, a subsonic round that dropped him silently beside the very target he had been protecting. The second guard died a moment later, his body falling behind a concrete barrier where it would not be immediately visible to his teammates. Sarah was already moving, circling the depot's perimeter like a predator stalking prey, when the third guard finally noticed that 2 of his colleagues had gone silent. The man called out in Spanish, asking for a status report, but received only echoes in response. He signaled to the remaining guards, pointing toward the positions where their teammates had been standing moments before. As they moved to investigate, Sarah struck again, her knife finding the 4th guard's spine while her rifle dispatched the 5th with a precision shot that sent him tumbling behind a fuel drum. The last guard, realizing he was alone and under attack, began spraying automatic fire wildly in Sarah's general direction. His panic made him dangerous but inaccurate, bullets whining off concrete barriers and punching holes in fuel containers that began bleeding diesel onto the ground. Sarah waited for him to exhaust his magazine, then emerged from cover just as he struggled to reload. Her shot ended his panic permanently, and sudden silence fell over the depot. Working quickly, Sarah placed explosive charges on the main fuel tanks while collecting additional weapons and ammunition from the dead guards. The charges were small but precisely placed to create maximum destruction when the fuel ignited. She set the timers for 5 minutes, giving herself enough time to reach a safe distance before the fireworks began. The explosion, when it came, lit up the compound like a miniature sun. Flames shot hundreds of feet into the air, followed by a mushroom cloud of black smoke that could be seen for miles. The concussion knocked guards off their feet and shattered windows throughout the main building. More importantly, it drew every remaining guard toward the depot, leaving other areas of the compound temporarily undefended. Sarah used the confusion to infiltrate the main building itself, scaling the outer wall while everyone's attention was focused on the burning fuel depot. The building's interior was a maze of corridors and rooms that had been modified to serve the cartel's needs. Expensive artwork hung alongside surveillance monitors, and armed guards in designer clothing patrolled halls lined with both Renaissance paintings and modern weapons racks. The civilian hostages were being held in what had once been the building's ballroom, a grand space with high ceilings and ornate chandeliers. Through a cracked door, Sarah could see at least 20 men, women, and children sitting against the far wall, their hands bound and their faces showing the strain of prolonged captivity. For guards watched over them, their attention divided between their prisoners and the chaos erupting outside. Sarah's approach required patience and precision. The guards were alert and well-positioned, with clear lines of sight across the room and multiple escape routes if threatened. Any mistake would result in civilian casualties, an outcome she could not accept. Instead, she waited and observed, learning their patterns and identifying vulnerabilities in their positioning. The opportunity came when 2 of the guards left to investigate reports of the fuel depot attack. That left 2 men to watch 20 hostages in a room with multiple entrances, odds that Sarah could work with. She entered through a service corridor that connected to the room's stage area, using the elevated platform's curtains and equipment to mask her approach. Her first target never saw the attack coming. Sarah dropped from the stage rigging behind him, her arm encircling his throat in a chokehold that cut off blood flow to his brain. He collapsed unconscious within seconds, his weapon clattering to the marble floor. The sound alerted the second guard, who spun toward the stage with his rifle raised. Sarah was already moving, rolling across the stage as automatic fire chewed up the expensive flooring where she had been standing. The guard's muzzle flashes lit up the darkened stage like strobe lights, but his shots went wide as Sarah's malfunctioning suit created a dazzling display of light and color that made accurate aim impossible. She came up behind an amplifier stack, her own weapon trained on the guard's position. The man was experienced enough to recognize that he was outmatched. He backed toward the hostages, clearly intending to use them as human shields, his rifle swinging between Sarah's position and the terrified civilians. This was the moment Sarah had been dreading, a direct threat to innocent lives with no clean solution available. But sometimes the best solution comes from an unexpected source. The civilians, who had been watching the confrontation with growing hope, suddenly understood their role in the drama. Without any coordination or discussion, they collectively threw themselves flat against the floor, denying the guard his human shields and leaving him exposed. Sarah's shot took him down before he could react to their coordinated movement. The hostages looked up at their rescuer with a mixture of relief and confusion. Sarah's malfunctioning suit was still cycling through its chaotic light patterns, making her appear more like an alien visitor than a human soldier. She quickly moved among them, cutting their bonds and providing what reassurance she could in her limited Spanish. Their freedom was only temporary, the compound was still crawling with cartel soldiers, but it was a start. As Sarah prepared to move the civilians to a more secure location, her earpiece crackled to life. Colonel Martinez's voice carried a note of desperate urgency. Echo 7, satellite surveillance shows massive reinforcements approaching your position. Estimated arrival in 30 minutes. Whatever you're planning, you need to execute immediately. Sarah looked around the room at the 20 civilians who were counting on her for salvation, then, at the windows where she could see muzzle flashes from the guards still searching for her in the compound. 30 minutes to eliminate 50 remaining enemies and evacuate non-combatants from a fortified position with no support and limited ammunition. Under normal circumstances, it would be impossible. But, as she had already proven multiple times today, normal circumstances no longer applied. The second document closed with Sarah facing her greatest challenge yet, protecting innocent lives while eliminating an entire army of enemies with nothing but her skills, her determination, and a piece of malfunctioning technology that had become her signature calling card in this dance of death. The rescued civilians huddled together in the ballroom's corner while Sarah rapidly assessed their condition and capabilities. Among them were a local doctor, 2 teachers, a mechanic, and several farmers, people whose only crime had been living in territory claimed by the cartel. Their faces showed the strain of captivity, but Sarah could see determination growing in their eyes as they realized that rescue was actually possible. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a woman in her 50s whose medical skills had kept her alive when the cartel needed someone to treat their wounded, stepped forward. In accented English, she said, "I know this building. I have been here 3 weeks, treating their injured. I can show you the safe routes and hidden passages." Her offer was both generous and strategic. Local knowledge would be invaluable in navigating the compound's defenses. Sarah quickly organized the group, assigning the strongest men to help elderly and injured hostages while positioning those with medical or technical knowledge where they could assist if needed. The mechanic, Carlos, revealed that he had been forced to maintain the cartel's vehicles and knew the location of every fuel line and electrical system in the building. This intelligence would prove crucial for Sarah's evolving plan. Through the ballroom's tall windows, Sarah could see guards regrouping around the burning fuel depot. The fire had consumed most of the available fuel, but secondary explosions were still lighting up the night sky. More importantly, the destruction had eliminated the cartel's ability to pursue escaping vehicles, effectively trapping everyone, both friend and enemy, within the compound until reinforcements arrived. The radio chatter she intercepted revealed growing desperation among the remaining guards. Santos was screaming orders, trying to coordinate a systematic search of the main building, but his men were demoralized and increasingly afraid. They had lost nearly half their number to an enemy they could not see, understand, or predict. Some guards were suggesting retreat, while others advocated for killing the remaining hostages and fighting to the death. Sarah's tactical situation was both better and worse than it appeared. Better because the enemy was disorganized and afraid, worse because cornered animals were often the most dangerous. The approaching reinforcements would restore the cartel's confidence and numerical advantage, but they would also be fresh troops unfamiliar with the psychological warfare Sarah had been conducting. She had a narrow window to complete her mission before facing an entirely new set of challenges. The building's layout, as described by Dr. Vasquez, revealed several strategic opportunities. The main structure was built around a central courtyard, with multiple levels connected by both obvious staircases and hidden servant passages that dated back to the colonial era. The cartel had modernized the security systems but had not bothered to seal the old passages, assuming that their presence was unknown to outsiders. Carlos provided additional intelligence about the building's infrastructure. The electrical system was centralized in the basement, while emergency generators were located on the roof. The communication center occupied the 3rd floor, and Santos had established his command post in what had once been the master bedroom suite. This information allowed Sarah to prioritize targets and plan a systematic campaign to eliminate the cartel's remaining operational capabilities. The first phase of her plan involved cutting power to the building, forcing the guards to rely on emergency lighting and battery-powered communications. Sarah led a small group of civilians through one of the servant passages toward the basement, moving silently through narrow corridors that had been designed to allow staff to move unseen throughout the house. The passage walls were lined with vintage wine racks and storage cabinets, remnants of more civilized times. The basement electrical room was guarded by 2 men who were more focused on watching the main entrance than protecting the actual equipment they were supposed to secure. Sarah eliminated them quietly, using her knife to avoid the noise that gunshots would create in the confined space. The electrical panel was a complex array of modern circuit breakers installed alongside original fuses from the building's colonial construction. Working quickly, Sarah began systematically shutting down power to different sections of the building. Rather than creating total darkness, which would affect the civilians as much as their enemies, she selectively eliminated lighting in corridors and common areas while leaving emergency power active in the rooms where hostages might be located. This created a patchwork of light and shadow that favored her tactical approach. The power cuts triggered immediate chaos throughout the building. Guards who had been moving confidently through familiar territory suddenly found themselves navigating darkened hallways where every shadow could hide an enemy. Their radio communications became fragmented as battery-powered units struggled to maintain signal strength through the building's thick walls and electrical interference. Sarah's next target was the communication center, which she reached by climbing through another servant passage that connected the basement to the upper floors. The narrow stairwell was barely wide enough for one person, but it provided complete concealment while allowing her to move between floors without using the main corridors where guards were conducting their searches. The communication center was the building's nerve center, filled with sophisticated equipment that coordinated not only the compound's defenses but the cartel's broader operations throughout the region. Destroying it would blind Santos to both internal and external threats, preventing him from effectively coordinating with the approaching reinforcements. Four guards protected the communication center, their attention divided between monitoring the radio traffic and watching the corridor approaches. Sarah observed them through a ventilation grate, noting their positions and identifying the most critical equipment. The room's layout favored defenders, with clear sight lines and limited approach routes, but it also concentrated high-value targets in a confined space. Sarah's assault began with a thrown smoke grenade that filled the room with thick, choking clouds that neutralized the defenders' visibility advantage. As the guards stumbled through the artificial fog, Sarah struck with swift precision. Her knife found the first guard's heart while her rifle eliminated the second with a suppressed round that barely whispered through the chaos. The third guard managed to fire several wild shots before Sarah's blade found his throat, while the fourth died trying to activate an alarm that would have summoned help from throughout the building. With the guards eliminated, Sarah systematically destroyed the communication equipment using small explosive charges placed at critical junction points. The destruction was thorough but controlled, eliminating the center's capabilities without creating a fire that might spread to other parts of the building. When she finished, the cartel's ability to coordinate any organized resistance had been eliminated along with their communications with the outside world. The psychological impact of losing communications was immediate and devastating. Guards throughout the building found themselves isolated, unable to call for assistance or receive orders from their leadership. Some began abandoning their posts, while others clustered together in small groups that provided emotional comfort but made them easier targets for Sarah's continued harassment. Santos himself was becoming increasingly desperate as his carefully constructed criminal empire crumbled around him. Through intercepted radio fragments before the communication center's destruction, Sarah had heard him ordering the execution of remaining hostages as revenge for the assault on his stronghold. This intelligence accelerated her timeline. She needed to reach Santos before he could implement his murderous plan. The approach to Santos' command post required crossing the building's central courtyard, an open space surrounded by balconies and windows that provided multiple sniper positions for defenders. Sarah studied the courtyard through windows and doorways, counting at least 8 guards positioned around its perimeter. The space was illuminated by battery-powered emergency lights that created stark contrasts between bright pools of light and deep shadows. Her malfunctioning suit had evolved throughout the day, its patterns becoming more sophisticated as its damaged systems attempted to compensate for the original malfunction. The chaotic light display had settled into a more rhythmic pattern that almost resembled natural phenomena, like sunlight filtering through moving water or moonbeams shifting through clouds. While still far from its intended invisibility function, the effect was now mesmerizing rather than simply confusing. Sarah decided to use the suit's unique properties as the centerpiece of a psychological assault on the courtyard's defenders. Rather than trying to sneak past them, she would walk boldly into the open space and let the guard's own fear and confusion work in her favor. It was a dangerous gamble, but conventional tactics had become predictable, and Santos guards were expecting stealth and ambush, not a direct confrontation. When she stepped into the courtyard, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The guards, already on edge from hours of terror and uncertainty, found themselves confronting something that challenged their understanding of reality. Sarah's suit created an almost supernatural appearance as she moved through the emergency lighting, the patterns of light and color seeming to shift and flow around her like liquid mercury. The first guard to fire missed completely, his aim thrown off by the optical illusion created by the malfunctioning suit. His muzzle flash illuminated Sarah's position for a split second, but by the time his eyes adjusted, she had already moved to a different location. Other guards began firing wildly, their shots going wide as they struggled to track a target that seemed to exist in multiple places simultaneously. Sarah used their confusion to devastating effect, moving through the courtyard like a dancer performing a deadly ballet. Her rifle spoke in whispered death, each shot precisely placed to eliminate defenders while minimizing the risk to any remaining hostages in the surrounding rooms. Within 2 minutes, the courtyard was silent except for the echo of her footsteps on ancient stone. The stairway to Santos' command post was the most heavily defended position in the building, with overlapping fields of fire and multiple fallback positions. 8 guards had barricaded themselves behind overturned furniture and sandbags, creating a killing field that would challenge even a full assault team. But Sarah no longer needed to fight like a conventional soldier. The day's events had transformed her into something else entirely. Instead of attacking the stairway directly, Sarah used the servant passages to reach the floor above Santos' position. From there, she could hear the cartel leader screaming orders at his remaining men, his voice high with panic and rage. He was demanding that they hold their positions at all costs while threatening to kill anyone who showed cowardice. The threats revealed just how close his organization was to complete collapse. Sarah planted shaped charges against the floor of the room directly above Santos' command post, calculating the precise amount of explosive needed to breach the barrier without bringing down the entire building. The civilians were still scattered throughout the structure, and their safety remained her primary concern even as she prepared to eliminate the man responsible for their captivity. The explosion, when it came, was perfectly calculated. The floor beneath Sarah's feet disappeared in a controlled collapse that sent her dropping into the middle of Santos' command post like an avenging angel. The cartel leader and his bodyguards were still reacting to the blast when Sarah landed among them, her rifle already speaking its lethal language. The third document concluded with Sarah face-to-face with the man responsible for so much suffering, surrounded by his last desperate defenders in a room filled with smoke and chaos. The final confrontation was at hand, and only one of them would walk away from this encounter alive. Miguel Santos scrambled backward across the expensive Persian rug as Sarah landed in the center of his command post like a nightmare made manifest. The shaped charge explosion had filled the room with dust and debris, creating a hellscape of broken furniture and shattered electronics. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows that danced across the walls, while sparks from damaged electrical systems added a strobe light effect to the chaos. Sarah's suit had reached a new level of visual distortion, the accumulated damage and system adaptations creating an almost hypnotic display that made her appear more like a shifting illusion than a solid human being. The effect was particularly pronounced in the smoke-filled room, where particles of dust and debris interacted with the suit's malfunctioning photonics to create an aurora of color and movement. Santos' 4 remaining bodyguards recovered from the explosion's shock with professional speed, their weapons swinging toward this impossible apparition that had materialized in their midst. These were not the frightened street soldiers Sarah had been eliminating throughout the day, they were elite mercenaries with military training and years of combat experience. Their initial surprise lasted only seconds before training took over and they began coordinating their response. The first bodyguard, a scarred veteran with prison tattoos covering his arms, fired a burst from his submachine gun that would have cut Sarah in half if she had remained where she landed. But she was already rolling, the suit's chaotic patterns making it impossible for him to track her movement accurately. His bullets chewed up expensive hardwood flooring and priceless artwork, but found only empty air where his target should have been. Sarah's response was immediate and devastating. Her rifle spoke twice in rapid succession, the suppressed rounds taking down the tattooed gunman and his partner before either could adjust their aim. The third bodyguard, showing impressive tactical awareness, dove behind an overturned desk while laying down covering fire that forced Sarah to seek her own cover behind a marble column that had somehow survived the explosion. Santos used the firefight to scramble toward a hidden panic room located behind his office's bookshelf, but his movement caught Sarah's attention. She could not allow him to escape, too much intelligence would be lost, and too many future victims would suffer if the cartel leader survived to rebuild his organization. A single shot shattered his kneecap, sending him tumbling across the floor with a scream that echoed through the damaged room. The third bodyguard emerged from cover, attempting to reach his wounded boss while maintaining suppressing fire. His courage was admirable, but his tactics were flawed. Sarah used the marble column's reflective surface to track his movement, then stepped out with perfect timing to place 2 rounds center mass. The man's loyal charge became a death run that ended with him sprawled across his employer's legs. That left only one defender between Sarah and her primary target. The 4th bodyguard had positioned himself in a corner of the room that provided excellent fields of fire while minimizing his exposure to return fire. He was patient and disciplined, content to wait for Sarah to make a mistake rather than rushing into a confrontation that favored his opponent. His tactical competence made him dangerous in a way that the other guards had not been. Sarah studied the situation carefully, noting the bodyguard's position and the available cover options. The room's layout favored defenders, but it also limited escape routes. More importantly, time was running out. She could hear vehicles approaching the compound as the cartel's reinforcements finally arrived. Whatever happened in this room needed to happen quickly. The solution came from an unexpected source. Santos, writhing in pain from his shattered kneecap, began screaming threats and orders at his remaining bodyguard. The injured cartel leader's panic was undermining his own defense, distracting his protector and revealing positions that had been carefully concealed. Sarah used these verbal outbursts to pinpoint the bodyguard's exact location, then employed a technique that had served her well throughout the day. Instead of engaging in a conventional firefight, Sarah created chaos and confusion. She tossed a flashbang grenade into the center of the room, then followed it immediately with a smoke grenade that filled the space with thick, choking clouds. As the bodyguard struggled to maintain visual contact with his targets, Sarah moved with liquid grace through the artificial fog, her malfunctioning suit creating ghostly afterimages that further confused an already impossible situation. The bodyguard's muzzle flashes revealed his position like a beacon in the smoke, but his shots went wide as he fired at shadows and illusions. Sarah stalked him through the chaos like a predator, using sound and movement to triangulate his location while remaining invisible within her technological shroud. When she struck, it was with surgical precision, a single suppressed round that ended his resistance permanently. With the last bodyguard eliminated, Sarah emerged from the smoke to face Miguel Santos alone. The cartel leader had dragged himself to a corner of the room, leaving a trail of blood across the expensive carpet. His face was pale with shock and blood loss, but his eyes still burned with the arrogance and cruelty that had built his criminal empire. Even wounded and defeated, he radiated malevolence. "You think you've won something?" Santos gasped in accented English, his voice thick with pain and rage. "I am nothing. A replaceable piece. The organization will continue, and your government will keep buying our products. This changes nothing." His defiance was impressive given his circumstances, but it also confirmed what Sarah had suspected: eliminating him would disrupt operations temporarily but not permanently destroy the network. Sarah knelt beside the wounded man, her rifle trained on his head while she activated a recording device. The intelligence value of a captured cartel leader was immense, potentially worth more than all the tactical victories she had achieved throughout the day. Information about supply routes, corrupt officials, and future operations could save countless lives and disrupt criminal activities across multiple countries. "You're going to tell me everything," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who had spent the day proving that impossible things were achievable. "Names, locations, financial networks, government contacts. Everything." The malfunctioning suit continued its light show around her, creating an otherworldly backdrop that made her seem more like a supernatural interrogator than a human soldier. Santos laughed, blood bubbling from his lips with the effort. "I tell you nothing, soldier girl. Nothing at all. You kill me or you don't, but I give you nothing useful." His resistance was expected. Cartel leaders were notorious for their refusal to cooperate with authorities, knowing that betraying their organizations meant death for themselves and their families. The sound of vehicles entering the compound added urgency to the confrontation. Through broken windows, Sarah could see headlights sweeping across the courtyard as trucks filled with heavily armed reinforcements arrived to restore cartel control. The new arrivals would be better equipped and more numerous than the guards she had been fighting all day. Her tactical advantage was about to disappear. Sarah made a decision that would have surprised her superiors and violated several international laws. Instead of attempting to extract Santos for interrogation, she began systematically destroying the intelligence materials scattered throughout his command post. Documents, computer hard drives, communication records, everything that might provide insight into the cartel's operations was methodically eliminated using small incendiary charges.
"What are you doing?" Santos demanded, watching his life's work literally go up in smoke.
"Those records, they are worth millions. You destroy evidence, you destroy justice." The irony of a cartel leader appealing to justice was not lost on Sarah, but she had realized something important during her time in the compound. The real victory was not in capturing Santos or seizing his records, it was in demonstrating that his organization was vulnerable, that their fortress could be penetrated by a single determined operative. The psychological impact of this raid would ripple through the criminal underworld, making other cartel leaders question their own security and, perhaps forcing them to waste resources on paranoid defensive measures. More importantly, the 20 civilians who had been rescued would return to their communities with stories of liberation and hope. They would tell others that the cartels were not invincible, that resistance was possible, and that help could come from unexpected sources. This narrative was worth more than any intelligence report or captured criminal. As the incendiary charges consumed the last of Santos' records, Sarah prepared for the final phase of her mission: escape and evasion. The reinforcements had surrounded the building, but they were unfamiliar with its layout and unaware of the servant passages that had served her so well throughout the day. The same routes that had allowed her to move unseen while hunting guards could now facilitate her extraction. Santos watched her preparations with growing understanding. "You're leaving me alive," he said with surprise.
"Why?" "You have eliminated my men, destroyed my records, ruined my operation.
Why not finish what you started?" His confusion was genuine. In his world, conflicts were resolved through complete destruction of the enemy. Sarah looked down at the wounded cartel leader, her expression hidden behind the suit's chaotic light patterns. "Because you're no longer important," she said simply. "Your organization will spend the next year trying to figure out how this happened. They'll assume betrayal, investigate their own people, waste resources on internal security. Your reputation as an invincible leader is finished, and that's worth more than your death." The psychological warfare aspect was only part of her reasoning. Leaving Santos alive but completely defeated would send a message throughout the criminal underworld that was more powerful than any military victory. It demonstrated that even the most secure cartel strongholds could be penetrated, their leaders humiliated, and their operations dismantled by forces they could not predict or understand. Sarah moved toward the window where she had already identified her escape route, a series of balconies and roof sections that would allow her to reach the compound's outer wall without encountering the reinforcements now flooding the building's main entrances. The malfunctioning suit that had started as her greatest liability had become her signature advantage, creating a legend that would outlive the specific details of this mission. As she prepared to leave, Santos called out one final time.
"What are you? What do I tell them when they ask who did this?"
His question revealed the depth of his confusion. This attack had been unlike anything in his experience, challenging his understanding of how conflicts were supposed to unfold. Sarah paused at the window, her form outlined against the night sky like a creature from another world. "Tell them the future came calling," she said, then disappeared into the darkness beyond, leaving Santos alone with his wounds and his shattered empire. The extraction through the compound's defenses was anticlimactic after the intensity of the previous hours. The reinforcements were focused on securing the main building and assessing the damage, giving Sarah multiple opportunities to slip past their perimeter undetected. Her route took her through the same jungle paths where she had begun the day as a reconnaissance operative and ended it as something entirely different. Colonel Martinez's voice crackled through her earpiece as she reached the extraction point 3 miles from the compound.
"Echo 7, report status.
Satellite imagery shows significant structural damage and multiple heat signatures.
Confirm your condition."
The relief in her handler's voice was evident. He had been monitoring the situation for hours without any communication from his operative. "Mission parameters exceeded," Sarah reported, allowing herself a small smile as she began the long walk toward the helicopter landing zone.
"Intelligence objective modified and completed. 20 civilians extracted safely. Hostile capabilities neutralized.
Recommends psychological warfare analysis of operational effectiveness. The technical language could not convey the day's reality, but it would have to suffice for the official records.
As she moved through the jungle darkness, Sarah reflected on the transformation she had undergone.
She had entered the compound as a soldier following orders and emerged as something more, an agent of change who had discovered that the most powerful weapon was not technology or training, but the willingness to adapt when circumstances demanded impossible things. The malfunctioning suit would be repaired or replaced, but the lessons learned from its failure would influence her approach to future missions. Behind her, the compound burned like a beacon in the night, visible for miles as the destroyed fuel depot continued to feed flames that consumed the cartel's material wealth. But the real destruction was psychological, the shattering of the myth that criminal organizations were untouchable, that their fortresses were impregnable, and that their leaders were beyond the reach of justice. The 20 civilians who had been rescued would carry this story back to their communities, sharing it with others who had lived under the cartel's oppression. Word would spread that resistance was possible, that help could come from unexpected sources, and that even the most powerful criminals were vulnerable to those with sufficient determination and skill. As Sarah disappeared into the jungle night, she left behind more than a destroyed compound and defeated enemy. She had created a legend that would inspire others and strike fear into the hearts of those who profited from others' suffering. The Special Forces operative whose camouflage had malfunctioned had indeed eliminated 50 enemies in silence, but her greatest victory was in proving that sometimes the most effective weapon against tyranny is the simple demonstration that it can be overcome. The final document closed with Sarah Chen walking toward her extraction point, forever changed by a day that had begun with equipment failure and ended with the kind of victory that could not be measured in casualties or captured intelligence, but in the hope restored to people who had forgotten that freedom was possible.